Assalamualaikum and hi, I am Muhammad Amirul Anas bin Muhammad Shuhairi from Band 7A and my metric number is 054988. So today I'll be explaining about CDA and SFL. First of all, what is CDA and SFL? CDA is critical discourse analysis and SFL is systemic functional linguistics, or is known as systemic functional grammar. So Fairclough in 1995 described CDA's view of language as multifunctional, which reminds us that it incorporates an orientation to mapping relations between language, which is text, and social structures and relations. The view in CDA of language as inevitably connected to social structures is strongly linked to Holliday's view of language as a social semiotic. So, what is social semiotic? The social semiotic view of communication views language as a set of resources which can be used by speakers or writers to realize their interests or goals, which is very prominent in SFL and CDA. Halliday states the linguistic analysis of discourse pursues two possible levels of achievement, what he deems the lower of the two levels. So, the lower of the two levels are understanding and explanation. For understanding, the linguistic analysis enables one to show how and why the text means what it does. So in the process, there are likely to be revealed multiple meanings, alternatives, ambiguities, metaphors, and so on. So this level should always be attainable provided the analysis is such as to relate the text to general features of the language. For explanation aspect, on the other hand, the linguistic analysis may enable one to say why the text is or is not an effective text for its own purposes, as in what aspect it succeeds and what aspects it fails or less successful. So it requires an interpretation not only of the text itself, but also of its context.
Hello, my name is Samni, my matrix number 056903 and I am from Band 7B. So I will talk about the functions of language. In systematic functional linguistics, Halliday attempts to explain three functions of language that are performed by text at the same time. These functions are known as the experiential, interpersonal, and textual functions of language, and we may identify a variety of linguistic options for each purpose. According to Hart 2014, researchers strive to interpret the ideological functions of these decisions in CDA. It may be identified by making certain choices in how linguistically reconstruct event, authors, or speakers exploit the meaning potential of language. One of language functions in SFL is the experiential or additional function. The experiential or additional function encodes patterns of experience in a written or spoken text, the basic and also the literary meaning, and is predominantly communicated through transitivity, which may be examined using a model that much outperforms standard lexicogrammatical analysis. For example, the sentence John planted a vine in the greenhouse. John is the person, planted is the action, which is from the past, a vine is the object, and in the greenhouse is the location. And all of this could be handled in the grammar as follows. So I think that's all from me. So I will pass the presentation to the next presenter.
My name is Iman and I will be sharing about the interpersonal function, which is one of the functions of language that is introduced by Michael Halliday. So the basic meaning of interpersonal function is the expressive and cognitive meaning of a written or spoken text. It is how language operates as an interactive event between a reader, speaker, writer, and listener. And this function is realized in wordings through mood and modality, unlike the expression function. So this function mirrors the tenor parameter of register and is evidenced in two ways, based on Michael Halliday's example. So interpersonal functions, like I mentioned just now, it relates with mood and modality. So there are a few examples that I provided for interpersonal function, which the first one could be a command, like keep out, turn left at the red lights. Also, it also can be a request, such as, will you pass me the teapot, please? Could you lend me £1? Or may I borrow the mat, please? It also can be a suggestion from one to another, such as, how about making pancakes for tea? Or what about trying a different brand? It also can be an offer, such as, would you like a cup of tea? Or can I give you a hand? And lastly, it can be a will or a wish, such as, let this be a lesson to you, may never do this again, or long live the king. These examples relate with mood and modality of a person, depends on the relationship and social status of a person. If you are in a high ranks, you can give a comment, you can give an order to people that in lower class than you. The next function is the textual function, which relates to the context with features such as annotations and pauses in written or spoken text. So this is the one whereby language serves as a means to create text as opposed to merely isolated and disconnected sentences. This function of language is as a mean by first, considering cohesion and coherence in a text. Second, the former referring to the internal connection between clauses in a text. And the last one is the latter, to show how external connections are built between text and its context. So basically, these functions relates with the coherence in a text, the meaning, the functions of it, and the context of the text itself. So let's take a look at the example provided from the textbook. So through textual function, the speaker is able to give a thematic structure to the elements of the clause contents. So let's take a look at the example. I provide you the same features of the example. If you can see through the example that is provided, they all have the same elements, which is they bought the computer yesterday, the computer they bought yesterday, and yesterday they bought the computer. All those three sentences, they have same elements, but the theme of the sentence is different depending on the context, the cohesion and coherence of the context of the text itself. So the first sentence, they bought the computer yesterday. From here, we can see the agents, which is they, work as a team in this sentence. The second one, the computer they bought yesterday. The computer, which is the goal of the text, acts as the team in that sentence. And the last one is yesterday they bought the computer. And in this sentence, the yesterday is which works as the time, also acts as a team in that sentence. So if you can see here, the first agents, the first element of the sentence work as a team depending on the context you want to deliver to the speaker. As the functions of language, we have, first and foremost, we have text, which is either written or spoken text. Then from the text, we can know the context of it. And also from the text, we can analyze the semantics, which is the meaning of the text itself. And we can analyze the meanings, the semantic elements through lexicogrammar, which is the wordings, which what I just showed through the example given just now. And how do we do the lexicogrammar process? This is why Michael Halliday introduced us the functions of language. So the first one is additional, which closely related to the field, which is what is going on within the context, within the meaning of it. And we can analyze that through transitivity, which is the processes, participants, and circumstances that will explained by the next presenter. And we have the second type of functions, which is interpersonal. Interpersonal function closely related to tenor, which is the social relations of the context, which is the relationship of you and people surrounds you. And how do we analyze the social relations, which is through mood and modality, such as speech roles and attitudes. And lastly, we have textual functions, which is closely related to the mode, which is the contextual coherence of a written or spoken text, and we can analyze the mode through theme and cohesion of the text itself. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman, for the great explanation. I am Nurul Sakinah binti Muhammad Rozi, and I'll be presenting the experiential function or transitivity. Experiential function, as defined by Halliday, refers to how experience the various goings-on in the world represented in language. Transitivity, as defined by Fowler, is the way clause is used to analyze events and situations as being of certain types. Now, how do these two relate to each other? So experiential function, from my understanding, is rather a general definition of transitivity, and transitivity is a more technical and operational definition of experiential function. And it is a term that is used more widely in systemic functional linguistics. So in systemic functional linguistics, transitivity is used in a more expansive sense than in traditional grammar. Like, it goes beyond the traditional grammar that we always discussed. It goes beyond than the usual verb, nouns, and tenses. Transitivity explains about some processes that have their own specific terminology, which refer to participants who carry out a process or people who are affected by the process. And the process occurs in a specific circumstance. Now, Simpson in 1993 outlines 3 components of transitivity, which are the process, the participants, and their circumstances. Now let's take a look at the process. The process usually expressed by a verb phrase in a clause like running, looking, attacking, and there are 6 types of processes, and each of them is defined according to whether they refer to feelings, actions, speech, states of mind, or states of being. The 6 types of processes are material processes, verbal processes, mental processes, behavioral processes, relational processes, and existential processes. Now, the participants are the roles involved in the process, and they are typically realized by noun phrases in the clause like father, mother, parents, children, or politicians, and many more. Participants are referred to differently in each process. It means that in each process, the participants are referred to in different names. Okay, they have specific terminology of participants in each process. Now, the last component of the transitivity is the circumstances, which are heavily associated with the process, and normally they are expressed by adverbial and prepositional phrases. Now, let's take a look at the first example. Sakinah excelled the exam in school. So, as I mentioned just now, the process usually expressed by a verb phrase, and in this case, excelled is the verb phrase, and it is a material process, and material process will be further explained by Alpha. And the participants usually expressed by a noun phrase, and in this case, Sakinah is the subject and the exam is the direct object. Now let's take a look at the circumstances, which usually expressed by adverbial or prepositional phrase, and in this example is the phrase in school. And in this case, it expressed location. So by now, I hope you guys can identify the process and the participants in a clause. Now let's take a look into the third component of transitivity, which is the circumstances. Now the circumstances have 2 categories. The first category is the core circumstances, which I'll be explained after this, and the second category of circumstances is the non-core circumstances, which I will explain in the next slide. Now let's take a look at the first category of the circumstance, which is the core circumstances, and it answers the questions why, where, when, and how, and usually expressed by adverbial and prepositional phrases. Now, I'd like to believe that the core circumstances can easily be found in simpler sentences in a piece of work, okay? Let's take a look at the first example. The first element of core circumstances is location. Amni won the competition in UNISA. So, in UNISA is the prepositional phrase, and it refers to the location. Okay, the second element is manner. Alif recites the prayer vehemently. So vehemently is the adverbial phrase in the sentence, and it represents the manner. The third example is time. Arif reads the book in the evening. So in the evening is the prepositional phrase which represents the time. The last example, Muhammad danced to the music for pleasure. So for pleasure is a prepositional phrase, and it represents the reason. Now let's take a look at the second category of the circumstances, which is the non-core circumstantial elements. These non-core circumstantial elements add to the core circumstances that I've mentioned just now to recognize other possibilities in a clause. And this is a rather complex or more complicated elements to be identified in a sentence. The first element of non-core circumstantial is accompaniment. Accompaniment answers the question with whom. For example, Ali reads the book with his friend. So with his friend, answer the question of Ali is accompanied by whom, right? The second element is extent. So extent answers the question at what interval. So Ali reads the book from afternoon until evening. And the third element is contingency. So contingency answers the question under what circumstances. Ali reads the book despite it being difficult. So despite it being difficult is the circumstance, and it represents contingency. The fourth element is angle. So angle answers the question whose or which perspective. So the example is Ali reads the book according to the librarian. So according to the librarian is the perspective, and it answers the question from which angle. Okay. The fifth element is role, and role answers the question as what or into what. So as a lover of literature, Ali reads the book. So that is the role of Ali, a lover of the literature. Okay. And the last element is matter, and matter answers the question about what. Ali told everyone about the book he had read. So about the book he had read, so the keyword about there answers the question about what, and it represents matter. Before I pass the presentation to Alpha, I'd like to remind you guys that all the examples I've given you are simple examples just for you to better understand how to differentiate the process, the participants, and the circumstances. In reality, you will be confronted with a rather more complicated text or speech for you to work with, okay? That's all from me. Thank you.
Material processes. What is it? Material processes are process of doing. This will refer to the concrete action with results and consequences. An actor is the person who does the act. A goal is the person or entity to whom which it is done respectively. The sentence, soldiers shot the insurgent. Soldier is the act since he is the person doing the action, whereas the insurgent is the goal because the action is done towards them. Non-goal directed. Soldiers fired when they arrived at the village. Here we can see that soldiers is the actor, but there is no goal but only an event that accompanies the material processes. Non-goal directed can also refer to abstract or metaphorical processes. After the recession, the value of Malaysian ringgit fell. Fell is the word that shows abstract or metaphorical processes. However, material processes can still be carried out by an inanimate actor known as event process. Example, the tank fired at the village during the war. This is considered as inanimate and event process. This is so because the word tank is not human, so it is inanimate. Example 2. The soldiers fired the village during the war. This is considered as animate or action process because a soldier is an animate actor that does the action. It is also interesting to note that if a news report chooses to use an inanimate sentence, there is an element of mitigation, which is to reduce severity or seriousness. There is also sentences known as intention process, where an actor acts voluntarily, or supervention process, where it is an involuntary act. You may refer to the slides to the example. Lastly, material processes can have beneficiaries. Recipient and client are roles referring to whom the action occurs, whereas range is participant that is unaffected by the process.